So we're going to start with this article by Carl Butzer and Georgia Enfield, Critical Perspectives on Historical Collapse, which, if you want to look more into, we're going to read through it together, but there's a link on the speaker's notes below when you exit the PowerPoint. And there's also a book, also there's an entire issue from this 2012 article in which there's more examples and more articles related to the topic of civilizational collapse. What's also quite interesting about this is that it's coming from a science journal, in fact. So this is not usually something that would be publishing works on history, but it's something interdisciplinary, which you're going to come across a lot if you do end up choosing to research and write for this article. Question. So we're going to start with the abstract. Abstract being, of course, one of the most important parts of an article. When you read through it, will give you an understanding of whether or not it's going to be relevant for what you're writing about. So let's read through this together. Bearing in mind that it's written 12 years ago, so some of the other articles that we looked at before, some of the themes, like for example, collapsology, the term coined in 2015, is a lot more centered around impact of climate change, whereas this is a bit more historical. But at the same time, we've seen this renewed interest in the historical collapse of ancient civilizations from, I would say, about the 2010s onwards, including up to now, partly sparked by our own understanding that the world in which we're living is facing potential civilizational collapse, particularly through climate. So what's important to note is that outcomes of societies under stress were complex and unpredictable. And there's also the case of 5 others overcoming breakdown through environmental, political, or social cultural resilience, which deserves as much attention as identification of stressors. So when you're writing your article, I would very much suggest that you go back to the special issue and look for examples of societies which did manage to avoid collapse, because this is going to nuance your understanding of what collapse is and also what kind of factors cause collapse. And hopefully this will make this idea of collapse a lot more nuanced. I think the first BBC article that we read with Luke Camp is a great introduction, but you could perhaps argue after reading this that it was a bit simplistic. It didn't account for the trajectories of collapse and how they might have actually been narrowly averted at times. So environmental crises are an important factor here as well. And then they talk about longer-term diachronic experience offering insight into how societies have dealt with acute stress, a more instructive perspective for the future than is offered by apocalyptic scenarios. So pause the screen, perhaps, if you want to read through that sentence. Again, it's quite a difficult sentence, but it's basically saying that looking at things through a longer term perspective and not just looking at, one specific moment, one specific hinge point of collapse, but looking at a wider period in history temporally is going to give us a more useful perspective when we look at current civilizational collapse or future civilizational collapse, rather than assuming that we're bound to all die, we're bound to all collapse as a society.